In this video, we'll talk about how to create a box plot using the data set that we talked about in the last video. So if you haven't watched that, make sure you go back and take a look at that. We found the median to be 8, the first quartile to be 5, the third quartile to be 12.5, and the IQR to be 7.5. We need all of these things first before we can begin to create our box plot. So I'm going to start by plotting the information that we know. So I'm going to work on that down here. Let's do that in blue. I want to pay attention to what's the least the least data value and the greatest data value. So I need all of my range of numbers to be, say, between 3 and 24. I'm going to go from 0 to 25. So let's put 0 over here, and then we'll say we're going to scale our axis by 5. So 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So I guess we didn't need all of that. Let's erase that. So that should be enough for our box plot here. I'm going to start by creating our median. So our median was 8. That's going to be the line in the middle of our box plot. So the median's somewhere between 5 and 10, a little bit closer to 10. Here is our median. And then our third quartile was 5, so that's going to be right here. And then our third quartile was 12.5, so it should be exactly between 10 and 15. So there's our third quartile. So I'm going to go ahead and create my box. This is probably the simplest part of the box plot, and it should look something like this. So there's the box part of the box plot. Now we've got to talk about the whisker. Sometimes it's called a box and whisker plot. This is the part that students tend to struggle with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find what's called the lower and the upper fence. Some books might have different terms for these. I'm going to go ahead and start with the upper fence. So the upper fence for this problem is Q3 plus 1.5 times my IQR. So our Q3 we said was 12.5 plus 1.5 times my IQR, we said that was 7.5. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply these out. I have 12.5 plus 1.5 times 7.5 should give me 23.75. I'm going to hold on to that number just for right now. And then my lower fence is Q1 minus 1.5 times my IQR. So Q1 we said was 5 minus 1.5 times my IQR was 7.5. So once again, I have a little bit of calculation to do. 5 minus 1.5 times my IQR is 7.5 gives me negative 6.25. So what these two numbers together do is they basically tell me what is and is not considered an outlier. Anything in between negative 6.25, let's highlight it here, anything between negative 6.25 and 23.75 is not considered an outlier. But if we have anything that is less than negative 6.25 or greater than 23.75, that would be considered an outlier. So I'm going to look at the smallest data value here was 3. That is not less than negative 6.25, which means that that is not an outlier. So what that means is for the lower end, the whisker of this box plot, it's going to extend to 3, which we'll say is roughly right here between 0 and 5, a little bit closer to 5. So we do not have any outliers on the lower end because 3 is it's in between these two numbers. It lives in this interval. So 3, not an outlier. But if I look at the upper end, my greatest data value was 24. That is greater than 23.75. Or another way to look at it is 24 does not live between negative 6.25 and positive 23.75. It It's not between those two numbers. So that means that this is going to be an outlier. So 24, I'm going to make a little note to myself here. This is an outlier. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to look at the next largest data value, which would be 14. And I'm going to ask myself, well, is this number an outlier? Does 14 live between these two numbers? And yes, 14 does live between 23.75 and negative 6.25. So that's not an outlier. So when I go to construct the upper part of my box plot, the whisker part is only going to extend to 14. It's not going to go all the way to 24. It's going to reach to the next highest number that is not an outlier. So in this case, it's going to go to just about 15, a little bit shorter than 15. It should look something like this. However, I have one last thing to do. I need to make sure that I mark that outlier. So that outlier is at 24. I'm going to put a little dot right there at about 24, maybe a little bit less than 25. Some books might notate this differently. They might use a dot. They might use an X. They might use an asterisk. Any of those will mean that we have an outlier there at 24. I like to just use a dot. So the thing that we want to remember is that this 23.75 and negative 6.25 are not necessarily going to appear as the endpoints of our whisker, but they help us to determine what is and is not going to be an outlier. So use that to help you make that determination. These whiskers extend to either what's the least data value that is not an outlier, which in this case was 3, or the greatest data value that was not an outlier, which in this case was 14.